In the summer of 2018, Francesca Sullivan wasn't running from anything. She was riding toward something. Toward freedom, adventure, and the kind of life most people only dream about. At 27, she was smart, strong, and deeply loved by her family. She had spent over a year planning a solo motorcycle trip across America, a journey she had always dreamed of taking. Her parents, Mark and Eleanor Sullivan from suburban Pennsylvania, waved her off with a mix of pride and worry, holding on to the one rule she promised to follow: a call or text every single night, no matter what. But on the third day of her trip, that promise broke. Francesca vanished without a trace, somewhere in the wild, untamed beauty of Colorado's San Juan Mountains. What followed was 6 years of heartbreak, false hope, and a mystery that would stretch across states, seasons, and even the limits of human understanding. At first, everyone believed she had crashed. The mountains were known for swallowing up riders who underestimated their power. Cell towers were sparse, GPS signals unreliable, and nature, as always, indifferent. Her family, desperate and clinging to hope, launched their own search, driving thousands of miles, knocking on doors, handing out flyers, and chasing every whisper of a lead. Meanwhile, online forums exploded with theories, some thoughtful, others cruel, as strangers tried to piece together the puzzle of her disappearance. But for 6 long years there was nothing. No body, no bike, no answers, just silence. Until one historic monsoon season in New Mexico changed everything. A kayaker, navigating the swollen Rio Grande, spotted something strange caught in the debris, a flash of red. What he pulled from the river wasn't just a motorcycle. It was Francesca's, the very same red BMW she had ridden into the mountains years earlier. But the discovery didn't bring peace. It brought more questions. Because the bike hadn't been in the water for 6 years. It had only been submerged for about 6 months, which meant someone had been holding onto it for years. And now, the truth was starting to rise to the surface. The discovery of Francesca Sullivan's motorcycle in the Rio Grande was more than just a break in the case. It was a shift in everything anyone thought they knew. For 6 years, her parents, Mark and Eleanor, had lived with the unbearable uncertainty of not knowing what had happened to their daughter. They had imagined her lost in the Colorado mountains, buried under snow, or perhaps wandering somewhere with no memory, trying to find her way back. But now, with the motorcycle found hundreds of miles away in New Mexico, those fragile hopes were gone. What replaced them was something far worse: the realization that someone had been holding onto that bike for years, hiding it like a secret. They were too afraid to let go of. Detective Mateo Reyes, the investigator now leading the case in New Mexico, understood the weight of what they had uncovered. He wasn't just dealing with a cold case. He was staring into the wreckage of a life that had been deliberately erased. The damage to the motorcycle, the fact that it had been dropped from the Rio Grande Gorge Bridge, all pointed to something intentional, something calculated. This wasn't an accident. This was disposal. Someone had gone to great lengths to make sure Francesca's story ended in silence. And now, after 6 years, the truth was clawing its way back into the light. The map fragment found inside the airbox was the first real lead they had in years. It showed a remote stretch of northern New Mexico, near the Colorado border, a place where towns were small, roads were few, and people kept to themselves. The circled town on the paper was nothing more than a speck on the map, a place where time seemed to move slower and strangers didn't go unnoticed. It was the kind of place where secrets could hide for a long time. But now, with the motorcycle found and the case reclassified as a homicide, the investigation was back in motion. Reyes and his team began retracing Francesca's possible route, trying to understand how she could have ended up so far from where everyone believed she had vanished. Francesca had always been an adventurous soul. But she wasn't reckless. She had planned her trip with precision, mapping out every stop, every gas station, every scenic overlook she wanted to visit. Her parents had watched her prepare for months, printing out maps, marking routes in highlighter, double-checking weather forecasts. She had promised to stay in touch, and she had kept that promise until she didn't. The last photo she sent to her mother, the one taken at the turquoise lake surrounded by snow-capped peaks, was supposed to be the highlight of her journey. Instead, it became the last piece of her that the world could hold on to. But now, with the discovery of the map fragment, investigators realized that Francesca's journey hadn't ended there. She had kept going, heading south into unfamiliar territory. The question was why. Had she taken a detour? Had she been following a route she had planned but never told anyone about? Or had someone else taken control of her path, steering her toward a fate she never saw coming? As Reyes dug deeper into the timeline, he found inconsistencies that made his stomach tighten. Francesca's final phone ping had placed her somewhere in the Colorado Rockies, but the motorcycle had only been submerged in the Rio Grande for less than a year. That meant someone had kept the bike for years, possibly 5, before deciding to get rid of it in the most dramatic way possible. The implications were chilling. Had the killer ridden it for years, pretending it was theirs? Had they stored it in a garage, waiting for the perfect moment to erase the last trace of Francesca Sullivan? Or had they simply waited until the world had stopped looking? The Sullivan family, still reeling from the news, struggled to make sense of it all. Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the Arizona diner, the false lead that had given them a brief spark of hope before snuffing it out. She hated herself for having believed, even for a second, that Francesca might still be alive. Now, the truth was undeniable. Their daughter was gone, and someone had gone to great lengths to keep her disappearance hidden for years. The grief they had carried for so long had now turned into something else, a quiet, simmering rage. Mark, usually the more composed of the two, found himself waking up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of Francesca's last days. He had always believed that if they had just looked harder, searched longer, they might have found something, anything. But now, he realized they had been looking in the wrong place all along. The mountains they had scoured, the forests they had combed, none of it mattered. Francesca had been taken somewhere else, somewhere no one had thought to look. The investigation in New Mexico was moving quickly, but answers were still elusive. Reyes and his team were combing through surveillance footage from gas stations, motels, and roadside diners along the route Francesca might have taken. They were reaching out to local law enforcement, asking if any reports from that time matched the profile of the missing woman on a red motorcycle. They were even reviewing unsolved missing persons cases from the past 6 years, hoping to find a pattern, a connection, anything that could point them toward the person responsible. But the deeper they dug, the more unsettling the mystery became. There were no obvious red flags, no missing persons reports that matched Francesca's description. The towns along the route were quiet, the people reluctant to talk. Some said they remembered seeing a woman on a motorcycle, a red one, but couldn't say when or where. Others claimed they had seen nothing at all. The land was vast, the roads were empty, and time had a way of erasing even the most obvious traces of a life. Then, just when it seemed like the case might stall again, the Rio Grande gave up another secret. A geology professor studying the effects of the recent monsoon season noticed something unusual along the riverbank, a human bone, half buried in the mud. It didn't look like it had been there for 6 years, but the location was close enough to where the motorcycle had been found to raise alarms. Reyes was called in immediately, and within days, a full forensic excavation was underway. The remains were carefully removed and transported to the state medical examiner's office, where a team of specialists began the painstaking process of identification. The bones were fragmented, scattered by the force of the floodwaters, but there was enough to work with. As the anthropologist examined the remains, she noted a detail that sent a chill through the room: a healed fracture on the clavicle, matching a childhood injury Francesca had suffered when she was 16. The confirmation wouldn't come for weeks, but already, the weight of the discovery was settling over everyone involved. Francesca Sullivan had not only been murdered, she had been hidden, her body left to the mercy of the river, waiting for the right storm to bring her back to the surface. But the question remained, who had done this? And why had they waited so long to get rid of the motorcycle, the last piece of evidence tying them to the crime? The investigation was far from over. The case had taken a dark and unexpected turn, and for the Sullivan family, the nightmare was only beginning. The truth was out there, buried in the dust and silence of the New Mexico desert. All they could do now was keep searching, keep asking questions, and hope that someone, somewhere, still remembered what happened to Francesca Sullivan. The bone found by the geology professor wasn't just a clue, it was a message from Francesca herself, written in silence and carried by time. It changed everything, yet answered nothing. Detective Mateo Reyes stood at the edge of the excavation site, watching as forensic technicians carefully bagged each fragment of what remained of her. The sun beat down on the high desert, turning the canyon walls into blinding gold. But there was no warmth in the air for him. This wasn't closure. This was the beginning of a darker chapter. For 6 years, the world had believed Francesca Sullivan vanished in an accident, lost to the mountains she loved. Now, the truth was undeniable. She had been taken, she had been silenced, and someone had gone to great lengths to make sure no one would ever find her. But who and why? Reyes couldn't stop thinking about the map fragment. That tiny piece of paper tucked inside the airbox felt like a whisper from the past, too deliberate to be random. Was it left behind by accident, or did it mean something more? He kept returning to the same question. If Francesca had been using that map, why would she have only torn off a small corner? Why not carry the whole thing? Unless she didn't get the chance. Unless someone else took it, someone who didn't care about the rest of the route, only about one specific place. The Circled Town, a name most people outside northern New Mexico had never heard of. Caimeo. It was a quiet, unassuming village, nestled in the foothills, known more for its historic Catholic shrine than anything else. A place where families had lived for generations, where strangers were noticed but rarely questioned. Reyes sent a team to canvass the area again, showing Francesca's photo, asking about any unusual activity back in 2018. But the responses were the same. Polite shrugs, distant memories, stories half remembered and quickly forgotten. One elderly woman at a roadside stand selling hand-painted crosses said she might have seen a woman on a red motorcycle, but she couldn't say when. Could have been last year, she said, squinting into the sun, or 5 years ago. Time runs slow. Out here, back in Pennsylvania, Mark and Eleanor sat across from each other at their kitchen table, the same table where they'd once planned birthday parties and holiday dinners. Now it was covered in printouts, photos of the recovered bike, news, articles, maps of New Mexico. They barely slept anymore. Every new detail reopened the wound. Learning that Francesca hadn't died in a crash, that she had been alive long enough to cross state lines, meant she had suffered. Someone had hurt her. Someone had looked her in the eye and made the choice to end her life. The thought was unbearable. Eleanor spent hours staring at that final selfie, the one with the turquoise lake and the snow-capped peaks. She used to see joy in it. Now, all she saw was innocence. Francesca had no idea what was coming. She had no idea that her journey, her dream, would lead her into the hands of someone capable of such cruelty. Mark tried to stay strong for her, but he was breaking inside. He kept replaying the phone call from Detective Reyes. The way his voice had softened when he said, "We believe she was murdered." 3 words. That's all it took to shatter a lifetime of peace. Meanwhile, online, Francesca's story was exploding all over again. True crime forums lit up with fresh theories. Some claimed the killer was a local mechanic who had fixed her bike and then lured her somewhere remote. Others speculated she had stumbled onto something she wasn't supposed to see: a drug operation, a hidden property, a secret someone was desperate to protect. A few even suggested the man from the gas station in Colorado wasn't cleared after all. Maybe his alibi was faked. Maybe he had followed her south. The speculation ran wild, feeding off the lack of answers. Reyes tried to ignore the noise. He knew public attention could help, but it could also poison the investigation. He focused on the facts. The motorcycle had been hidden for years. That wasn't the act of a panicked killer. That was premeditated. Whoever had it had kept it, stored it in a garage, maybe ridden it in secret, maybe looked at it every day, reminded of what they'd done. And then, suddenly, after half a decade, they got scared. Or tired. Or maybe someone started asking questions. Whatever the reason, they decided it was time to get rid of it. So they drove it to the middle of the Rio Grande Gorge Bridge and let gravity do the rest. But here's what haunted Reyes the most. If the killer had held onto the bike for 5 years, why keep the body separate? Why dump the motorcycle but leave Francesca's remains exposed to the elements, scattered along the riverbank by floodwaters? It didn't make sense unless the two weren't dumped at the same time. Unless the body had been buried somewhere else, and only recently uncovered by the storm. Which meant someone had known where she was all along. He requested soil analysis from the excavation site, hoping to determine how long the bones had been there. Preliminary results suggested they hadn't been buried for more than a year, consistent with the timeline of the monsoon. But that raised another terrifying possibility. Had Francesca's body been hidden in a shallow grave near the river, only to be washed free when the floods hit? If so, the killer hadn't just disposed of evidence, they had left it within reach of nature's reckoning. Then came the autopsy report. No signs of trauma, no bullet fragments, no defensive wounds. The cause of death was officially listed as undetermined, but the manner was homicide. That contradiction gnawed at Reyes. How do you kill someone without leaving a mark? Poison, suffocation. Did she die quickly, or was it slow? The silence of the bones was maddening. He reached out to Francesca's medical examiner in Pennsylvania, requesting access to her full history. Her file showed she had no known enemies, no recent conflicts, no reason to be targeted. She was kind, responsible, well-liked. Her coworkers described her as the person who always brought cookies to meetings. There was no stalker, no restraining order, no red flags, just a young woman chasing a dream. And yet, someone had ended her. Reyes began digging into missing persons reports from northern New Mexico between 2018 and 2023. Nothing matched. He checked pawn shops, impound lots, even Craigslist archives, anywhere a motorcycle like hers might have surfaced. Still nothing. It was as if the bike had simply ceased to exist for 5 years. Which meant the killer either had a secure place to hide it, a locked warehouse, a private property with no oversight, or they had altered it, taken it apart, maybe even used it under a fake plate. One evening, Reyes got a tip from a tow truck driver in Taos. He said he remembered seeing a red motorcycle being hauled on a flatbed trailer late one night in October 2023. It was covered with a tarp, but he swore he saw BMW badges when the wind lifted the cover. He didn't think much of it at the time. People move bikes all the time, but after seeing the news, it stuck with him. Reyes tracked the license plate on the trailer. It led to a storage facility outside Santa Fe. The unit was rented under a false name, paid in cash, and had been emptied 2 weeks before the flood. The trail was cold again, but it was real. Someone had moved that bike. recently, and they had done everything by hand. No digital footprint, no traceable payments, no witnesses. This wasn't panic. This was precision. Back in Pennsylvania, Mark printed out a map of northern New Mexico and taped it to the wall. He marked every location tied to the case where the bike was found, where the bones surfaced, the circled town on the map fragment. He stared at it for hours, searching for a pattern, a connection, anything. Eleanor watched him, heartbroken. She wanted to believe justice was possible, but after 6 years of silence, she wasn't sure the world still worked that way. Then, one morning, she found something. Buried in an old email chain from Francesca's trip planning folder, a reservation for a cabin rental in Red River, New Mexico, dated August 24, 2018. 2 days after her last message, paid in full. Cancelled automatically due to no-show. Francesca had planned to go to New Mexico. She wasn't drifting. She wasn't lost. She was heading there on purpose. And someone must have known. The cabin rental reservation changed everything. It wasn't just a clue, it was proof that Francesca had meant to go to New Mexico. She hadn't strayed off course by accident. She hadn't been lost. She was heading there on purpose, with a plan, with a destination in mind. And someone must have known. That thought sent a cold ripple through Detective Reyes as he stared at the screen, rereading the email chain forwarded by Eleanor Sullivan. The reservation was under Francesca's name, paid in full, confirmed. The cabin was in Red River, a quiet mountain town nestled in the northern part of the state, less than 2 hours from where her motorcycle was found. She never made it, but she had fully intended to. Reyes immediately reached out to the property management company. The owner remembered the booking not because of anything unusual, but because cancellations were common, and this one stuck out for being so clean. No calls, no messages, just a silent no-show. When Reyes asked if anyone else had rented the cabin around that time, the answer hit like a brick. Yes, the same cabin was rebooked 5 days later under a different name. A man paid in cash, no phone number provided. The listing agent had thought it odd at the time. Most guests booked online, but figured it was someone local who preferred things old school. The name on the reservation, James Tillman, fake, almost certainly. But the date lined up too perfectly to ignore. August 29, 2018, just 4 days after Francesca's last message. Reyes pulled surveillance footage from every gas station, motel, and grocery store within a 50-mile radius of Red River for the week of August 22 to September 1. It was a long shot, but he was looking for anything: a red BMW, a woman traveling alone, or a man acting suspiciously. Then, on the third day of reviewing grainy clips, he saw it. A convenience store camera in Cuesta, about 30 miles from Red River, caught a glimpse of Francesca's bike pulling into the lot on the evening of August 24. There she was, in her blue and black armored jacket, removing her helmet, shaking out her hair. She looked tired but okay. She walked inside, came out with a bottle of water and a snack bar, waved at the clerk. The timestamp, 7:18 p.m. It was the first visual confirmation she had made it across the state line. She was alive. She was moving forward. But that was the last time anyone would see her alive. The next morning, another camera, this one at a rural post office near Taos Junction, picked up the same motorcycle, but this time, it wasn't Francesca riding it. The figure on the bike was taller, broader, wearing a dark hoodie and gloves, face hidden under a low cap. The rider didn't stop, just passed through the frame, heading south, toward the Rio Grande. Gorged the time, 9:47 a.m. on August 25th, the day after she was seen buying water. The day she was supposed to check into the cabin. Reyes felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't speculation anymore. This was evidence. Someone had taken her bike, and they were riding it south. He cross-referenced the route. From Cuesta to the gorge, the fastest way, cut through a stretch of remote backroads, narrow, winding, barely marked. The kind of place where a car could pull over, where a confrontation could happen without witnesses. He drove the route himself, windows down, eyes scanning the shoulders, the tree lines, the dry Oreos cutting through the sagebrush. Nothing stood out, no skid marks, no broken glass. Just silence and dust. Back at the station, the forensic team went back to work on the motorcycle. They'd already found the map fragment, but now they were searching for trace evidence, fibers, hair, fingerprints, anything left behind in those 5 hidden years. The airbox had protected the paper, but what else might have survived? Days passed. Then, a breakthrough. Inside the small storage compartment behind the seat, the one Francesca used for her passport, spare keys, and emergency cash, technicians found something. Not money, not documents. A single strand of synthetic fiber, deep blue, snagged on a sharp edge of the plastic housing. It didn't match anything in Francesca's gear, but it did match the kind of material used in work gloves, the kind construction workers or mechanics wear. Reyes ran it through the database. No direct hits, but when he overlaid it with the list of transient workers in northern New Mexico, during the summer of 2018, one name surfaced again, a man named Dale Haskins. He'd been arrested once, minor possession, but more importantly, he'd worked on a road crew that summer, doing repairs along State Route 378, a lonely stretch that runs right past the turnoff to the cabin in Red River. Records showed he'd been assigned to that area from mid-August to early September. And get this, he'd reported a stolen pair of gloves around that time. Blue work gloves. Said they were taken from his truck while he was at a diner. Too many coincidences. Reyes requested a warrant for Haskins' current residence, a trailer. On the edge of Espanola, when officers arrived, Haskins wasn't home. But his truck was. An older Ford F-150 with a faded mud flap that read built, not bought. Inside, under the passenger seat, they found a receipt, dated August 25, 2018, from a gas station in Tres Piedras, less than 10 miles from where Francesca was last seen alive. The purchase, $60 in fuel, and a bottle of engine oil, the same type used in BMW motorcycles. Reyes brought Haskins in for questioning. He was calm, too calm, mid-40s, wiry with sun-weathered skin and hands that never stayed still. He admitted he'd seen a woman on a red motorcycle that weekend, said she broke down near the construction site, claimed he gave her a ride to a nearby mechanic in Red River, then never saw her again. Nice girl, he said, shrugging. Didn't think much of it, but Reyes had the timeline. The mechanic, Haskins mentioned, had been out of town that week, closed for vacation. No record of any BMW being serviced. And when pressed, Haskins couldn't name the shop's owner, couldn't describe the building. His story fell apart fast. Still, without a body, without a confession, it wasn't enough. Then came the call from the medical examiner. Soil samples from the remains found in the riverbank contained traces of a rare mineral compound, clinoptilite, a volcanic ash found only in a specific geologic belt in northern New Mexico, centered around the very area where the circled town on the map fragment was located. More importantly, microscopic plant matter recovered from the same soil-matched pollen from juniper and pine trees native to that region, meaning Francesca's body had been buried there, not dumped directly into the river. She'd been hidden for years, and whoever buried her knew that land. Reyes went back to the map, zoomed in on the circled town, cross-referenced property records. One name came up repeatedly in that area, a family-owned plot registered to a now-deceased man named Earl Haskins, Dale's father. A chill ran down his spine. They got a search warrant for the property, a dry, rocky piece of land tucked into a shallow canyon, surrounded by scrub brush and old fencing. Nothing lived there now, but satellite images from the past 6 years showed something strange. Fresh tire tracks leading in during late 2018, and none coming out. And in the months before the flood, someone had disturbed the ground near a collapsed shed. Recent digging. The team moved in at dawn. As the first shovel broke the earth, Reyes stood back, heart pounding. They were so close. He could feel it. The truth was under that dirt. Francesca was waiting. And somewhere, somehow, Dale Haskins knew exactly what they were about to find. The bone fragments found along the riverbank weren't just proof that Francesca was gone. They were a message written in silence, carved by time and water. And now, with the forensic confirmation of her identity based on that healed clavicle, the case wasn't just about finding where she had died. It was about understanding how her killer had lived with it for 6 years. How someone could look at that motorcycle every day, maybe even ride it in secret, and still walk among people like nothing was wrong. Detective Mateo Reyes felt the weight of that truth pressing down on him. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a moment of rage or panic. This was something colder, more calculated. Someone had kept Francesca's bike hidden for half a decade, not because they forgot, but because they wanted to. And then one quiet Tuesday morning, a call came in from a woman named Rosa Marquez, a retired postal worker living on the outskirts of Chima. Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor underneath, the kind that comes when you've carried a secret too long and finally decide to let it go. She said she hadn't spoken up before because she didn't think it meant anything. But after seeing the news about the motorcycle being pulled from the Rio Grande, something clicked. Back in 2018, around late August, she remembered a man who used to come into the post office where she worked. He wasn't a regular, never gave his name, and he stood out, not because he looked suspicious, but because he didn't act like someone who belonged in a small town. He was too careful, too quiet, always wore gloves, even indoors. And every few weeks, without fail, he would buy a single stamp and mail a plain white envelope. No return address, no name on the front, just a handwritten zip code in Colorado. Reyes sat forward in his chair, his pulse kicked up. "Did you see what was inside?" he asked. "No," Rosa said, "but I remember thinking, why send a blank letter? Why spend money on postage if there's nothing in it?" That question haunted Reyes. A blank envelope, mailed monthly to Pennsylvania, the same state where Mark and Eleanor Sullivan lived. He requested the post office's old surveillance footage. Most of it had been overwritten, lost to time. But one grainy clip from August 30th, 2018, 5 days after Francesca was last seen alive, showed the man clearly enough, mid-40s, thin face, dark hair, pulled back, wearing a denim jacket and those same blue work gloves. The same kind of gloves that matched the fiber found in Francesca's bike. The same gloves Dale Haskins claimed were stolen. Reyes played the video again and again. There was something deliberate in the way the man moved, slow, controlled, like he was rehearsing a role. He didn't glance at the camera. Didn't fidget, he just placed the envelope on the counter, handed over exact change, and walked out. No hurry, no fear. Like he was doing something routine, normal. But mailing a blank letter to Pennsylvania every month, that wasn't normal. That was psychological warfare. Reyes ran the zip code. It led to a neighborhood in Reading, Pennsylvania, less than 3 miles from the Sullivan family home. Mark and Eleanor had received those letters. They just didn't know it. When Reyes called them, their voices cracked as they listened. Eleanor started crying before he even finished speaking. We thought she was gone, she whispered. But all this time, someone was telling us she was still there. Not in words, in silence. Every month, for 5 years, someone had reminded them, without them even knowing, that Francesca was missing. That she hadn't run away. That she hadn't just disappeared. That someone knew, and now, the worst realization hit. The killer hadn't just taken Francesca. He had been watching her family. Playing a game only he understood. Reyes ordered a full forensic sweep of Dale Haskins' property, not just the land, but everything inside his trailer. They found receipts, tools, clothes, nothing directly linked to Francesca. But then, in a locked metal box under his bed, they discovered a stack of newspapers. Local New Mexico papers, sure, but also copies of the Reading Eagle, Pennsylvania's main newspaper, dated from 2019 to 2023. Each one had the same page folded open, the obituaries, and every time the Sullivan family had published a memorial notice for Francesca on her birthday. On the anniversary of her disappearance, that clipping had been circled in red pen. This wasn't just obsession. This was ritual. Haskins wasn't just hiding the bike, he was tracking them, watching their grief grow, feeding off it. Reyes got a warrant to pull Haskins' phone records. The number was inactive, but the carrier still had data. For years, the same device had pinged towers near Red River Taos and Chimayo, all within range of the circled town on the map fragment. But in late 2023, something changed. The pings stopped. Then, on January 3, 2024, the phone connected, once briefly, near the Rio Grande Gorge Bridge. The same night park rangers reported an unidentified vehicle parked at the overlook after midnight. It was him. He'd gone back to finish it, but here's what chilled Reyes to the core. Haskins had no criminal history beyond petty theft. No record of violence, no connection to Francesca. Nothing to explain why a quiet road crew worker would become a predator, a stalker, a murderer. Then came the final piece. A technician reviewing the motorcycle's GPS unit, one that had survived the flood, barely recovered corrupted data from its memory chip. It was fragmented, scrambled by water damage. But using recovery software, they managed to restore a partial route log. It showed Francesca's journey through Colorado. Then a gap, then a single data point from August 25, 2018, not in New Mexico, but in southern Colorado, near the town of Alamosa, and attached to that signal was a second device, another Bluetooth connection. Active for 17 minutes. Someone had paired their phone to her bike. The lab traced the device ID. It was registered to a disposable phone, purchased with cash at a gas station in Durango. Untraceable, but the pairing itself told a story. Whoever it was had gotten close enough to Francesca's bike to sync with it, close enough to talk to her, to help her, to gain her trust. And then, somehow, take her. Reyes stared at the evidence board. Photos of Francesca. The map fragment, the blank envelopes. The bone fragments. Haskins' face? The timeline stretching across 6 years. He wasn't just looking at a murder. He was looking at a man who had lived with Francesca's ghost for years, who had kept her bike, watched her family, marked her death dates like holidays. And now, with the river giving up her remains and the truth closing in, Reyes knew one thing for certain. Dale Haskins wasn't going to wait for arrest. He was going to disappear, just like Francesca did, and if they didn't move fast, the only person who knew what really happened on that mountain road would vanish into the desert forever. The ground near the collapsed shed on Dale Haskins' property was soft from recent rain. The forensic team had already marked the spot with yellow tape, and the first shovels were breaking through the topsoil when Detective Reyes got the call from the lab. His radio crackled to life just as a technician shouted that they'd hit something, not wood, not rock, but cloth. Reyes held his breath. This was it. After 6 years of silence, after false leads, dead ends, in a river that gave up its secrets only when it wanted to, they were about to find Francesca. But then came the voice on the other end of the line. Calm, urgent, and completely unexpected. It was Rosa Marquez, the retired postal worker from Chimayo. She'd been awake all night, she said, thinking about the man in gloves, the blank letters, the way he never looked at anyone, and then it hit her. She didn't just see him at the post office. She knew him. His name wasn't Dale Haskins. It was Eli Carter, and he was the kayaker who found the motorcycle. Reyes froze. The name echoed in his head. Ben Carter, the man who reported the bike in the Rio Grande, the local river guide. The hero of the story everyone had praised for his sharp eyes and quick 911 call. It couldn't be, but the more Reyes dug, the more it unraveled. A search of public records showed no Ben Carter registered as a river guide in northern New Mexico, but an Eli Carter, age 44, had a fishing license under that name, issued to an address just outside Taos. Same town, same region. A photo pulled from a decade-old environmental permit showed a man with dark hair, hollow cheeks, and cold eyes. It was the same man from the post office footage. The same man who had worn gloves in August 2018. Reyes turned to the officer beside him. "Call the dive team. Now stop the excavation." Too late. They had already uncovered part of a body, not buried deep, but wrapped in heavy plastic weighted down with river stones. The remains were skeletal, consistent with years underground. But it wasn't alone. Next to the body, tucked inside a sealed plastic bag, was a small notebook. Reyes knelt in the dirt, gloved hands trembling slightly as he opened it. The pages were damp, the ink smudged, but readable. The first entry was dated August 25, 2018. Asterisk, she stopped to ask for directions. I told her I could show her the shortcut. She trusted me. God, she smiled when she said thank you. Asterisk, page after page unfolded like a nightmare. Eli Carter wasn't just a witness. He was the last person Francesca Sullivan ever spoke to. He'd lured her off the main road, driven her to a remote stretch of land he used for hunting, and killed her that same night. Not out of rage, not in a moment of panic, but because, as the journal put it, asterisk, I knew if she made it to Red River, she'd see the cabin, and she'd know. Asterisk, the cabin she had reserved. It belonged to him. He'd been living there off-grid for years. Hiding from a past no one in the area knew about, a restraining order from Colorado, a history of stalking women who traveled alone. When Francesca showed up with her reservation, he panicked. He couldn't let her check in. He couldn't let her see him, so he erased her, and then, for 5 years, he kept her motorcycle hidden in a locked storage unit under a fake name. A trophy, a reminder, a secret he carried like a second skin. But in early 2024, everything changed. His brother died. And in cleaning out his things, Eli found something that shattered him. A photograph. It was old, faded, taken at a music festival in 2015. Francesca Sullivan was in the background, laughing, arm around a woman Eli didn't recognize, until he flipped it over on the back. In her handwriting, asterisk, me and Mom Aspen, 2015, asterisk, the woman she was hugging was his mother. They were sisters. Sisters. Francesca didn't know. No one did. Their father had kept it quiet. 2 families, 2 lives, worlds apart. And Eli, raised by a single mother who never spoke of the man who left, had no idea he had a sister until the day she was standing in front of his cabin, smiling, asking for directions. The journal's final entry, written in shaky handwriting, said, asterisk, I didn't mean to. I didn't even know her, but now I hear her voice in the river. I think the water wants her back. Asterisk, that's why he dumped the bike. Not to cover his tracks, but to set her free. Reyes stood in the field, the notebook in his hands, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. They had found Francesca. They had found the killer. But the killer had already punished himself, because 2 days after reporting the motorcycle, Eli Carter, or Ben, as he called himself, had gone out on the Rio Grande alone. His kayak was found capsized near the same logjam where he'd spotted the bike. There was no body, just an empty boat, drifting downstream. Some said he slipped, others said he jumped. Either way, the river took him too. The case was closed. Francesca Sullivan was laid to rest beside her parents, under a stone that reads, asterisk, gone too soon, but never forgotten. Asterisk, her story still echoes in the mountains she loved, in the river that carried her home, and in the haunting truth that sometimes the cruelest twists aren't born of hate, but of a family that never knew it existed. The river gave her back, but it couldn't give them peace. After 6 long years of silence, the truth about Francesca Sullivan's disappearance finally surfaced. Not in a courtroom, not with a confession, but through the quiet persistence of nature and the unrelenting love of a family who refused to forget. Her remains, scattered by floodwaters and buried beneath layers of time and silt, were identified through a single healed fracture on her collarbone, a childhood injury that became the final fingerprint, linking her to the life she once lived. The red BMW, once a symbol of freedom and adventure, was pulled from the Rio Grande like a ghost rising from the deep, its twisted frame telling a story no one had dared imagine. And the man who found it, Eli Carter, posing as a local kayaker named Ben, wasn't a hero at all. He was the last person who saw her alive, the brother she never knew, and the one who silenced her before she could ever say his name. But even with the pieces finally coming together, there would be no trial, no dramatic arrest, no moment where Mark and Eleanor could look into the eyes of the man who took their daughter and ask, why? Because Eli Carter was gone. vanished into the same river that carried Francesca's bike and bones back to the world. His kayak was found overturned near the very spot he'd reported the discovery. His body was never recovered. Some said the current took him. Others whispered that he let go on purpose, that after 5 years of living with guilt, fear, and the unbearable weight of a secret too monstrous to carry, he chose to return to the water what he had stolen from it so long ago. Detective Mateo Reyes stood at the edge of the Rio Grande Gorge one final time. Months after the case was officially closed, the wind swept across the canyon, carrying the scent of sagebrush and damp stone. He held a folder under his arm, the final investigative report. It was thick with evidence, timelines, forensic analysis, and witness statements. But none of it could answer the question that haunted him most. What if they had known? What if Francesca had known she had a half-brother living just miles from her planned route? What if Eli had known she was family, not a threat? One missed connection, one shared last name in a database, one conversation, and none of this might have happened, but life doesn't work that way. Sometimes, the cruelest tragedies aren't born of evil, but of silence. Of secrets kept, of roads taken, and paths never crossed. Back in Pennsylvania, Mark and Eleanor laid Francesca to rest. Beside her mother's grave, they didn't need a casket. They didn't need a body. They had already mourned her 1,000 times over those 6 years. But now, for the first time, they could grieve with truth. At the funeral, friends and family gathered under a sky streaked with autumn gold. They shared stories, not just of her final trip, but of her laugh, her stubbornness, her love for bad karaoke, and road trips with the windows down. A photo of her on her motorcycle, smiling in front of that turquoise lake, sat at the front of the chapel. It wasn't a picture of a victim. It was a tribute to a woman who lived boldly. Even if her life was cut short, her parents made a promise that day not to let her story fade. They partnered with travel safety organizations, speaking to young adventurers about checking in regularly, sharing routes, and trusting instincts. They didn't want another family to live through the endless nights of wondering, the false leads, the hope that turns to ash. And slowly, quietly, Francesca's name began to mean something beyond a cold case file or a viral mystery. It became a reminder that every solo journey carries risk, that kindness shouldn't be mistaken for naivety, and that sometimes, the people we're searching for are closer than we think. In more ways than one. Online, the forums lit up. One last time, not with theories or wild speculation, but with messages of grief, respect, and reflection. People shared photos of their own motorcycle trips, tagging them #RideForFrancesca. Some left flowers at memorials for missing travelers. Others simply posted, "I'm checking in. I'm safe." That small act, that daily message, became a quiet movement, born from one family's pain. As for the cabin in Red River, it still stands, tucked away in the pines. The land passed through legal channels after Eli's disappearance, eventually sold to a nonprofit that now uses it as a retreat for families who've lost loved ones to unsolved cases. They call it Francesca's Place. A place to heal, to remember, to talk without fear. Detective Reyes visits once a year. He doesn't bring files or evidence bags, just coffee and silence. He sits on the porch, looking out at the mountains. Francesca dreamed of crossing. He thinks about how easily things could have been different, how one decision, to speak, to listen, to reach out, can change everything. And he wonders if, somewhere in the wind, she knows she's finally home. Because, in the end, Francesca Sullivan's story isn't just about a woman who vanished on a solo trip across America. It's about what happens when we stop looking, about the dangers that hide in plain sight, about the fragile threads that connect us, blood, chance, memory, and how easily they can be broken. It's a story of loss, yes, but also of love that refused to let go, of a river that kept its secrets for 6 years, then gave them back, and of a family who, against all odds, never stopped believing that someone, somewhere, would hear her name. So if you're watching this, and you're planning your own journey, whether it's across the country or just across town, check in, let someone know where you are, because the open road may be free, but it doesn't forgive. FORGET FULNESS. And if you ever see a red motorcycle on a mountain pass, or hear a story about a woman who disappeared, remember Francesca. Not for the way she died, but for the way she lived. With courage, with joy, with a heart full of miles. And though her ride ended too soon, her story is still moving forward. One voice, one memory, one check-in at a time.